Adara stood on the edge of the clearing, her heart beating with a frantic rhythm that mirrored the wildness of the world around her. A decision was coming, one that would change everything, but she didn't know if she was ready for it. She never asked for this life, this love, but fate had bound her to it. And now she had to face the price. Adara's bare feet left no trace on the frost-bitten earth, but her presence was undeniable. She walked with purpose, each step heavy with a promise she didn't want to keep. Her mind was a tempest, every thought a battle against the deep-rooted pull that urged her forward. The Alpha's bond. Her heart was beating furiously in her chest, each thump like a drumbeat, warning her of the fate she could never escape. She'd never asked for this, she never wanted it, and yet she was bound to it, a creature of duty in a world that demanded sacrifice. Her hand trembled as it brushed against the ancient stone of the clearing's edge, a cold reminder of the curse that had been laid upon her from the moment of her birth. The Alpha, Darius Phelan, was the only man she would ever love, and the only man she could never be with. Blood tied them in ways neither of them could fight, their destinies twisted together by forces older than time. Adara had been raised to accept it, to serve him, to wait for the day she would become his bride. But love had never been part of the equation. The heart she gave to him was not her own, and no matter how much she tried to push it aside, it was always there, aching, bleeding with every breath. And now, as she stood at the edge of the clearing, the night heavy with impending change, she had come to a brutal realization: she could never belong to him. Not in the way he wanted. Her body felt the heat of his presence before she saw him. The air shifted, and the earth beneath her feet trembled slightly, as if recognizing his power. Her stomach clenched, her pulse quickened, but she didn't turn. She couldn't, because she knew what would happen if she did. Darius Phelan, the Lycan king, the ruler of their pack, stood just behind her, his dark silhouette framed by the moonlight. His body was a statue of strength, chiseled and impossibly still. His eyes, those haunting golden eyes, were locked on her, but she didn't dare meet his gaze. Adara. His voice came, low and laced with an edge of command that sent shivers down her spine. "Turn around." She swallowed hard, fighting the instinct that urged her to obey. It wasn't a question, it was a demand, as always. But she remained unmoving, her back to him, unwilling to face the man who had haunted her every waking moment for as long as she could remember. She could feel him closing the distance, his steps silent on the ground, his power radiating like a storm just about to break. "You are mine," he murmured, his breath warm against the nape of her neck. The words were both a threat and a promise, a bond between them that she had never truly been able to sever. But she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of looking into his eyes. Not now. Not when the storm inside her threatened to explode. "I'm not yours," she whispered, her voice raw with the pain of that very truth. She couldn't say it any louder, couldn't risk the words being too real, too final. Because deep down, she knew what those words meant for her, for both of them. Darius's hand landed on her shoulder, his fingers brushing against her skin like fire against ice. She couldn't suppress the shudder that ran through her body at the contact. She was always weak when it came to him, no matter how much she fought it. "Then why are you here?" he asked, his tone dark, questioning. But there was no anger, just something colder, more dangerous. His voice, once filled with warmth, had now become a weapon, calculated, measured. Adara finally turned to face him, her eyes brimming with unshed tears that she refused to let fall. The weight of her emotions pressed down on her chest, squeezing until she could barely breathe. She could feel her heart crack in her chest, splintering with every passing second, every lingering touch. "I came because you asked me to," she said, her voice betraying the emptiness she had been carrying for so long. "But you must understand, Darius, I can't be the woman you want me to be." He stepped closer, towering over her with his intimidating presence. The scent of his skin, woodsy and rich with the earth itself, engulfed her. It was always this way, this intoxicating mix of power and desire. She could feel it now, the magnetic pull that always brought her back to him, no matter how many times she tried to resist. "You are the woman I want," he said, each word dripping with certainty, "and I will not lose you. Not again." She flinched as though he'd struck her, her breath catching in her throat. Her pulse thundered, each beat reminding her of the truth she could never escape. She was bound to him, no matter how much she fought it. But even as the words left his lips, something shifted in her chest. She wanted to believe him, to let herself fall into his embrace and surrender to the bond that was so deeply rooted in their souls. But there was a part of her, small, fragile, that couldn't allow herself to be consumed by him. Not when the world outside was just as cruel, just as determined to break her. "What do you want from me, Darius?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, as if the question had been buried so deep inside her that it could only be spoken in silence. "You have everything, power, loyalty, everything but my love, and I can't give you that." His gaze softened, but there was an edge of something more beneath it. Something darker, something possessive. "I don't need your love, Adara," he said, his voice low, dark with yearning. "I need your trust, and your heart. It will come, in time." She took a step back, shaking her head, her chest tight with the weight of his words. "But you can never have it, not when it's already been given to someone else." The silence between them was suffocating. The words hung in the air, thick with finality. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest, every breath she took feeling like a betrayal of the truth she could never say aloud. Darius's face hardened, the once tender expression melting into something colder, more distant. He had heard her, and he would not forget. He reached out to her, his fingers brushing against her cheek with a tenderness that belied the fury burning in his eyes. "You will be mine," he promised, his words a whisper of things to come. "In this life or the next." Adara closed her eyes, trying to block out the storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. She couldn't bear to hear him speak like that, like their bond was inevitable, like there was no escape. But deep down, she knew he was right. There was no escape. The bond between them was unbreakable, but she wasn't ready to face the consequences. Not yet. And as she turned and disappeared into the shadows of the night, Darius stood there, watching her go, knowing that the war for her heart had only just begun. Chapter 2, Bound by Fate, Torn by Choice. The moon hung like a silver sentinel above the world, casting its pale light over the sprawling landscape. Adara couldn't remember how long she had been walking, couldn't remember when the ache in her chest had become so unbearable. The forest around her felt endless, each tree an echo of the torment she carried within her. Her feet ached and her heart felt like it had been cleaved in two. The bond with Darius had always been there, an invisible thread that tugged at her soul every time she tried to pull away. But tonight, it was heavier than it had ever been, like a chain wrapped around her, pulling her toward him even as she ran from the very thing she feared. She needed to be alone, needed to think. But no matter how far she walked, she couldn't escape the pull of him, the weight of his eyes still burning into her skin. Her hand rose instinctively to her chest, fingers brushing the scar that had been left there the night her bond with Darius had been sealed. A mark of fate, a mark of possession. Her heart raced at the thought of him, of his golden eyes, that impossible strength, and the way he held her as though he could bend the world to his will. He was the Alpha, the king, the man who commanded everything and everyone around him, and yet there was still that part of him that needed her. But what was he asking of her? Was it truly her that he wanted, or was it the power she carried within her? She was no mere woman. She was the daughter of an Alpha lineage, a rare breed of female lichen with abilities even she didn't fully understand. But there was one thing she did know. Darius had always seen her as something more than just a bride. He saw her as his salvation, and that frightened her more than anything. The sound of crunching leaves broke her from her thoughts, a familiar rustling in the underbrush. Her heart skipped, her breath catching in her throat. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. "Darius," she whispered, her voice shaking despite herself. He emerged from the shadows like a predator, his presence overwhelming and undeniable. His scent, earthy and raw, filled the air before he even spoke, making her skin prickle. His golden eyes burned with an intensity she had never seen before, his jaw clenched, the muscle there twitching, as though he were struggling with something inside himself. "You think you can run from me?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous, a promise in the tone that made her blood run cold. Adara stood tall, though her heart pounded in her chest, her instincts fighting against her every movement. "I'm not running," she said, trying to steady her breath. "I'm just trying to breathe." Darius took a step forward, closing the distance between them in one long, purposeful stride. He reached out, his fingers grazing the side of her face, a touch that was both gentle and possessive. His eyes softened, but only for a moment. "You think I don't feel this?" he whispered, his voice almost a growl. "Every second I'm away from you, my soul fractures." Her breath caught in her throat. There it was again, the vulnerability he never showed anyone but her. The side of him she tried so desperately to ignore, but it made her feel everything. The fear, the longing, the impossible pull she couldn't escape. "I don't want this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never asked for this." Darius didn't move. His hand lingered on her face, his thumb brushing over her lips as if savoring the feel of her, like he could memorize the way she felt beneath his touch. He sighed, the sound carrying the weight of all the years of silence between them. "You do want this," he murmured, his lips hovering just above her ear. "And so do I. You just don't understand what this bond is, Adara. You don't understand what we are." Her pulse quickened, a lump forming in her throat. "I understand more than you think," she said, her voice hardening. "I understand that you see me as nothing more than an obligation, a piece of your kingdom you can claim. I'm just a means to an end for you, Darius. That's all I've ever been." The silence between them grew thick with tension, a chasm that seemed to swallow any words they might have shared. But then, in a single movement, Darius cupped her face with both hands, his grip gentle yet firm, as if grounding her to him, to this moment. "You think I don't love you?" His voice was low, pained, as though the mere suggestion cut him to the core. "You think this is about power? About my kingdom?" Adara's breath faltered as his words hit her like a punch. She had never seen him so raw, so vulnerable. He wasn't the king of the lichen world now. He wasn't the Alpha. He was just a man, her man, bound by the same fate that had torn her apart. "You are my kingdom, Adara," he said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "You are the only thing I've ever wanted, the only thing that matters." Her heart clenched, the agony of his words mixing with the confusion she felt. She wanted to believe him, wanted to give herself to him completely, but her fears, her doubts, they held her back. "You don't need me," she said, pulling back slightly, though her body ached to stay in his embrace. "You need power. You need a future. And I can't give you that." He stepped back then, his face hardening, though his eyes still shone with that molten intensity. "You are my future, Adara. Without you, there is no future for me." Her eyes burned with unshed tears, but she blinked them away. She couldn't allow herself to be weak. She couldn't allow herself to fall into his arms again, to believe the impossible. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I'm not the woman you think I am." Darius's expression darkened, his jaw tightening as he stepped closer, his body a wall between her and the world. He reached out and, with an almost painful tenderness, cupped her face in his hands once more. "You will be," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't quite place. "You will be the woman I need, the one I've waited for, the one I will fight for, even if it costs me everything." The promise hung between them, a weight too heavy to ignore, and for the first time in her life, Adara wondered if she was strong enough to resist it. The night stretched on, silent but full of the unspoken things that tethered them together, and as the distance between them closed, neither of them could escape the undeniable truth. No matter how hard they fought it, they were bound by fate, by blood, and nothing, no amount of resistance, no amount of will, could change that. Chapter 3: The Price of Loyalty. The forest held its breath as Adara stood before Darius, her heart racing, each beat a drum that threatened to drown out everything else. The night was silent, save for the distant rustle of leaves in the wind, yet within her everything was chaos. Her emotions churned, as tumultuous as the storm that was gathering on the horizon, invisible yet inevitable. Darius was close, far too close. His presence engulfed her like a wildfire, both scorching and soothing, a dangerous mix she couldn't seem to pull away from. His breath warmed her skin, and his hands, so large and commanding, held her with a tenderness that betrayed the brutal strength beneath. He wasn't just her alpha anymore. He was her past, her present, and an unavoidable part of her future. She could feel the invisible chains between them tightening, pulling her back to him, no matter how hard she tried to break free. "I will not leave you," he said softly, the words simple, yet packed with the weight of 1,000 unsaid promises. Adara swallowed, fighting against the wave of emotion that threatened to engulf her. Her mind screamed at her to walk away, to run, to preserve the last shred of independence she had left. But her body, her soul, they betrayed her. They wanted to be with him, more than anything else. "You're wrong," she said quietly, pulling back, her voice fragile. "You don't understand. I can't be with you. Not like this." Darius's gaze sharpened, the softness in his eyes replaced by a quiet intensity. His lips parted, and for a moment Adara saw the conflict flash across his face. He wanted to argue, to convince her, but he didn't. Instead, his fingers tightened briefly on her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Then why are you still here?" he asked, the words like a challenge and a plea. "Why can't you just admit it, Adara? You feel it too." The world around them seemed to fall away as her heart hammered in her chest. She had to fight this. She couldn't lose herself in him, no matter how much she wanted to. But how could she ignore the truth that his words hinted at? "I feel it," she whispered, and the admission cut her like a blade. "I always have." Darius's expression softened, but there was a sadness in his eyes, an understanding that pierced her to the core. "Then stop running. You and I are bound, Adara, and nothing, no one, can change that." She recoiled at his words, the finality in them almost suffocating. She couldn't argue with the truth of it. The bond between them had always been there, pulling her, drawing her in like gravity. But the price of it, The cost was far greater than she had ever been willing to admit. "I'm not ready," she said, her voice trembling with the weight of her own fear. "I don't know if I ever will be." Darius's eyes softened with an emotion she couldn't name, something far deeper than possession or dominance. It was care, love, the kind that was forged in fire, that didn't bend or break, but endured. He cupped her face, his thumb brushing the delicate skin of her cheek, the motion so tender it almost made her heart ache. "I don't expect you to be ready, not yet, but I will wait for as long as it takes, because I will never let you go." Adara closed her eyes, the tears she'd been holding back for so long threatening to spill. "You don't know what you're asking of me," she whispered, her voice raw with the truth she could no longer hide. "I do," Darius replied quietly, his breath warm against her lips. "But it's not just me you need to worry about, Adara. There are others who will never let you go, not until they've had their say." Her eyes snapped open, and for the first time, she saw the flicker of something else in his gaze. Something darker, something more dangerous than even their bond. "Who?" she asked, fear creeping into her voice. She didn't need to ask who Darius was talking about. The threat was clear. His enemies had always been present, lingering on the edge of their world, waiting for an opening. But now, it seemed, the opening had come. "Malachi," Darius murmured, his voice low, as though speaking the name aloud would bring it to life. "He's been watching you, waiting for the moment to strike. He knows about the bond, and he will stop at nothing to use it against us." Adara's heart skipped a beat. Malachi. The name echoed in her mind, a reminder of everything she had tried to forget. Malachi was the leader of the rogue Lycans, a man who had once been a part of their pack before betrayal tore him away. He had always harbored a dark ambition to take Darius's throne and claim everything that belonged to him, and now it seemed he was targeting her. Adara's breath caught in her throat. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice trembling as she struggled to grasp the weight of the situation. Darius's expression hardened, his jaw clenching in that familiar way that told her he was preparing for war. "We fight," he said simply, "and we protect what is ours." Her eyes searched his face, looking for any sign of uncertainty, but there was none. He was resolute, unwavering in his resolve. And in that moment, Adara realized something. She was no longer just a pawn in this battle. She was a weapon, a force of nature that could either destroy or save them all. "Are you ready for this?" Darius asked, his eyes searching hers, as if looking for the answer to a question he had long known the truth of. Adara took a deep breath, steadying herself against the weight of what was coming. The battle ahead was inevitable, and as much as she hated the idea of being thrust into the heart of it, she knew she had no choice. "Yes," she said, her voice stronger now, though the fear still lingered beneath the surface. "I'm ready." Darius nodded, a proud, approving look in his eyes. He had always believed in her strength, even when she had doubted herself. "Then we fight together," he said. "And when this is over, Adara, you will have a choice." She looked up at him, confusion clouding her features. "A choice?" He gave her a rare, soft smile, the kind that seemed to melt the hard edge of his persona. "You will choose whether to stand by me or walk away, but either way, Adara, you will never be alone." The weight of his words hung heavy in the air between them, but it wasn't just a promise. It was a vow that could either bind them forever or tear them apart. And in that moment, Adara realized just how much she had already given to him, how deeply her heart had already been claimed, despite her every effort to resist. She was no longer just a woman. She was his mate, whether she was ready or not. And now, They had a war to win. Chapter 4. The Shadow's Grip. Adara couldn't sleep that night. Even the quiet murmur of the forest, the rustling leaves and distant calls of night creatures did little to soothe her racing mind. She tossed and turned on the cold stone floor of the temporary camp they had set up, her body exhausted but her mind wide awake, turning over every word, every promise that had passed between her and Darius. The bond between them, once an abstract idea that she could shove aside, now felt like an ever-tightening noose. She could feel him even when he wasn't near, his presence gnawing at the edges of her consciousness, a constant hum beneath her thoughts. "You are mine." His words echoed in her head, haunting and possessive. But what did that mean for her? Could she really choose to walk away from him when the entire world seemed to conspire against their love? The sound of movement from the other side of the camp snapped her from her spiraling thoughts. She quickly sat up, her heart beating faster, a pulse of fear lacing her veins. Her instincts screamed at her, warning her of a presence that wasn't Darius's. She stood quickly, moving silently toward the edge of the camp, where the shadows clung to the trees like dark, watchful eyes. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with the promise of danger. But what could it be? They had been on high alert since Darius had spoken of Malachi's looming threat. Yet, there was something about the air tonight, something off. A figure emerged from the trees, moving with fluid grace, his silhouette barely distinguishable from the night. Adara's breath caught in her throat, her pulse racing. The man stepped into the flickering light of the campfire. His features were sharp, his face familiar but shadowed by time. He was tall, his dark hair wild and untamed, and his eyes she would never forget, were filled with a deadly intensity. Malachi. Her chest tightened, a wave of dread crashing over her. She had known this moment was coming. She had known that Malachi would find her eventually, but nothing had prepared her for the icy chill of his gaze locking onto hers. "I see you haven't forgotten me," Malachi said, his voice dripping with venom, though his tone remained calm, measured. Adara straightened, drawing herself up to her full height. She might be frightened, but she wasn't going to let him see it. "I wish I could say the same," she replied coldly, crossing her arms over her chest. "What do you want, Malachi?" His lips curled into a smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes, the kind that promised nothing but danger. "What I've always wanted, Adara. What I've always been waiting for." Before she could respond, Darius appeared behind her, stepping from the shadows with an authority that sent a chill through the air. His gaze was locked on Malachi, a predatory gleam in his golden eyes. The two men regarded each other for a long moment, an unspoken history between them, a rivalry that had festered for far too long. "This is not your fight," Darius said, his voice low, dangerous. "Leave now, Malachi, and I will spare you." Malachi laughed, a sound that was equal parts mocking and menacing. "Spare me?" He stepped forward, his eyes flicking to Adara, then back to Darius. "You think I'm here for you, Alpha? No, I'm here for her." Adara's stomach dropped, a wave of nausea sweeping over her. "You're insane," she said, her voice trembling despite her efforts to remain strong. "You think I'll just come with you? That I'll abandon everything for someone like you?" Malachi's smile grew, a glint of something darker lurking beneath the surface. "I don't need you to abandon anything, Adara. I'm simply offering you the chance to join me. You belong to the pack I could offer you, not this kingdom you've bound yourself to." His eyes flicked to Darius with disdain. The words hung in the air like a physical weight, but Darius's stance remained unwavering. His hands were clenched at his sides, his jaw tight with the restraint he clearly struggled to maintain. Adara could see the anger boiling beneath his cool exterior, the way his muscles rippled with the need to protect her, to destroy the man standing before them. "You're nothing but a parasite," Darius spat, "and you will never have her." Malachi's gaze sharpened, the air between them crackling with tension. "We'll see about that, Alpha," he said, his voice laced with venom. "You may think you own her, but I know the truth. You both do. She's not just some love interest to be protected. She's a weapon, and I will use her to take everything from you." Adara's breath hitched at his words, but she refused to let fear control her. This wasn't just about her. This was about Darius, about the pack, about everything they had built and fought for. And she wasn't going to let Malachi tear it all down, not without a fight. She stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest as she met Malachi's icy gaze. "You don't know anything about me," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor deep within her. "You're wrong if you think I'll ever side with you." Malachi's smile faltered for a moment, then returned with more menace. "We'll see," he murmured, his eyes glinting with something darker than hatred. "But time is running out, Adara. I'm not the only one who's interested in you." Adara's stomach twisted as Malachi turned and disappeared into the shadows, his final words lingering in the air like a cold promise. The camp was silent for a long moment, the tension still hanging thick in the night. Darius didn't move, his eyes locked on the space where Malachi had just been, his fists clenched, muscles coiled, ready to strike. Adara watched him, her heart heavy with the knowledge of what they were about to face. She had no illusions now. Malachi was only the beginning. There were forces at work, pulling her in ways she could neither control nor fully understand. And no matter how hard she fought, she couldn't escape the truth. Her world was changing, and so was her place within it. Darius turned to her then, his gaze softer but no less intense. "I won't let him take you," he said, his voice full of a promise she wasn't sure she could trust. "No matter what happens, Adara, you're mine, and I will fight for you." But the fear in Adara's chest only grew stronger. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to surrender to him completely. But with each passing moment, each threat that came closer to their door, she realized just how fragile their world was, and how much she stood to lose. Chapter 5. The Heart's Betrayal. The campfire flickered weakly, its pale glow casting long, distorted shadows across the clearing. Adara sat at the edge of the firelight, her legs tucked beneath her, but her mind was far away. Darius's words still echoed in her head, but they no longer provided the comfort they once might have. The promise he had made to her, "You're mine, I will fight for you," felt like a heavy weight around her neck now. She didn't doubt his determination, his loyalty. She knew he would lay down his life for her. But what about her? Would she lay down hers for him? The question haunted her, gnawing at her insides. Could she truly trust him? Could she really surrender everything to this man, to this bond, knowing what it had cost her already? The night seemed to close in around her, the silence so oppressive that it felt like the weight of the world pressing on her chest. The distant howls of wolves carried on the wind, but they no longer filled her with peace. Instead, they reminded her of the pack she was bound to, both in love and in duty, and of the enemies closing in on them. Her fingers curled into the fabric of her dress, the sensation grounding her, pulling her back to reality. She couldn't let herself get lost in her thoughts. There was too much at stake now. "Adara," Darius's voice came, soft yet full of authority. She had heard it 1,000 times, but tonight it was different. The edge in his tone made her heart skip a beat. When she turned to look at him, His gaze was unwavering, that fierce, burning intensity in his golden eyes. He had been watching her, waiting for her to come to him, but she wasn't sure she could, not yet. "I need you to trust me," Darius said, his voice heavy with meaning. "I need you to trust that I won't let anyone, anything, come between us." Adara swallowed hard, the knot in her throat tightening. She wanted to trust him. She did, in the deepest parts of herself, but the doubts were like a storm cloud in her mind, threatening to swallow her whole. Trust him? When every instinct screamed that their bond was leading them into danger, when her past, her family, her very essence was a tether to a future she was terrified to embrace. "I want to, Darius," she whispered, her voice trembling with raw emotion. "I want to so badly, but I don't know if I can, not when everything feels so uncertain." Darius closed the distance between them in a few long strides, his presence towering over her. He reached out to take her hands in his touch gentle but firm, as if anchoring her to him, to this moment. "Adara," he murmured, his voice low and laden with emotion, "I have never wanted anything more than I want you, but I need you to believe that I won't let anyone take you from me. I won't let anyone tear us apart, not Malachi, not my past, and not your doubts. I will fight for us. Always." She felt the weight of his words settle deep within her, and for a brief moment the world seemed to stand still. But then her mind flickered to the darkness that lingered in the edges of her consciousness. She pulled her hands from his grasp, standing abruptly, her pulse quickening. "You don't understand, Darius," she said, her voice breaking, the floodgates of her emotions opening with a rush. "I'm not just afraid of what's out there. I'm afraid of what's already in here." She placed a hand over her heart, where the bond between them pulsed like an unyielding rhythm. This, us. Darius didn't flinch. He didn't move. He just stood there, watching her, his gaze softening as he took in the fear that radiated from her. It wasn't the fear of the unknown that tormented her. It was the fear of surrendering to something she wasn't sure she could control. Her breath was shallow, her chest tight. "I can't be your salvation, Darius," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "Not when I feel so broken. Not when I don't even know if I can be the woman you deserve." Darius stepped forward again, this time with purpose, closing the gap between them. "Adara," he said, his voice low and steady, the command in it clear. "Look at me." When she finally raised her gaze, his eyes pierced through her, and for the first time she saw the depth of his commitment, the rawness of his love. "You are everything to me," he said, his voice unwavering, full of an intensity that took her breath away. "I don't need you to be perfect. I don't need you to fix yourself. I just need you to fight for us, for what we could have, for what we already have, even in the face of all this darkness." Adara's heart stuttered in her chest, the walls she had spent so long building around herself beginning to crack. She wanted to push him away. She wanted to keep running, keep hiding from the inevitable. But something in the way he looked at her, in the way he spoke to her, made it impossible to look away. She could feel the weight of his words sink deep into her bones, their gravity pulling her closer to him. This wasn't just about the bond between them. It wasn't about duty or obligation. It was about the heart, the fragile, beating heart they had both tried to protect in different ways. "I don't want to be afraid anymore," she whispered, more to herself than to him, her voice thick with raw emotion. "But I don't know if I can stop running." Darius's face softened, and he took another step closer, until there was no space left between them. His hand reached up, his thumb gently brushing away the tear that had slipped down her cheek. He leaned in slowly, his breath mingling with hers, his lips brushing against her forehead in the softest of kisses. "You don't have to stop running," he murmured. "Not yet. I'm right here. And I'll never let you go. You'll never have to run from me, from this, from us." Adara closed her eyes, the weight of his words wrapping around her like a blanket, offering warmth she hadn't realized she had been craving. But as she let herself sink into the comfort of his embrace, a nagging thought still lingered at the back of her mind. Malachi's words, the truth in them, no matter how much she tried to deny it. "You belong to me." Chapter 6. A Broken Kingdom. The dawn broke slowly, spilling pale golden light across the forest as Adara stood at the edge of the clearing, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She had stayed up all night, her thoughts running through everything Darius had said, every look he had given her, every promise he had made. His words were still so fresh in her mind, like a melody she couldn't shake, pulling at her, urging her to surrender. But the more she thought about it, the more uncertain she became. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that love, their love, could withstand the coming storm, but could she really put her trust in something that felt so fragile? The bond between them wasn't just about love. It was about survival, about power, and above all else, it was about fate. And what if fate had other plans for her? The wind picked up, causing the trees around her to sway in rhythm. She closed her eyes, letting the breeze wash over her, but no matter how hard she tried to relax, the tension inside her only grew. Her mind was still spinning, and she couldn't escape the feeling that something, someone, was out there, waiting. Footsteps crunched on the earth behind her, soft but deliberate. She didn't turn, but she knew who it was. "Adara." Darius's voice was steady, strong as always, but there was an undertone she hadn't heard before, an edge of something darker. She could feel it in the air, like a storm just waiting to break. "You're still up?" She nodded, her throat tight as she stared out into the distance, the weight of her thoughts pressing down on her. "I couldn't sleep." "I figured," Darius said. His tone softened slightly, but she could still feel the weight of his presence behind her, like the shadow of a mountain looming over a valley. Without saying anything else, he stepped closer, his hand brushing against hers lightly as if testing the waters. Adara flinched slightly at the touch, but she didn't pull away. "Come with me," he said, his voice low and gentle. "We need to talk." Adara's chest tightened as she slowly turned to face him, her eyes meeting his for the first time that morning. The sight of him made her breath catch in her throat. He was everything she both desired and feared, strong, unyielding, but with something raw in his eyes that mirrored her own uncertainty. "We can't keep pretending, Adara," he said softly, his eyes searching hers. "Not when the danger is so close. You know it too. Malachi is just the beginning. We're not safe, not until this is all over." "I know," she whispered, but the words felt hollow, like an echo of the storm raging inside her. "But Darius, how can I be part of this, your world, when I'm not even sure I can trust myself with you?" Darius stepped closer, his hands reaching out to frame her face, his touch gentle but insistent, like he was trying to pull her closer to him, to ground her. "I will never let you fall, Adara. Not when I'm standing right here, not when we have each other. But I need you to trust me. We're stronger together, always." A pang of guilt shot through her chest. She wanted to trust him. She wanted to believe that they could face the storm ahead as a united front. But fear gnawed at her, fear that her own heart wasn't strong enough to carry them both. "I can't be the woman you want," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She hated how vulnerable she sounded, how small she felt beneath his touch. I'm not strong enough, Darius. Darius's expression softened, and he shook his head slowly, as though he couldn't comprehend the doubt she held in her heart. That's not true, he said, his voice filled with conviction. You are stronger than you know, and you've always been enough for me. I just need you to see that. We need you to see that. She looked into his eyes then, the sincerity in them taking her breath away. She could feel the weight of his trust, the depth of his belief in her. But it only made the distance between them feel greater, because no matter how much he believed in her, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Adara looked away, her gaze lost in the distant horizon, as though the answer to her turmoil might lie in the woods. I don't know if I can do this, Darius. I don't know if I can fight the way you want me to fight. You don't have to fight alone, Darius said, his voice firm but softening with the rawness of his feelings. You never have to fight alone. She swallowed hard. The tears she had been holding back threatened to fall, and for a brief moment, she let them. Let herself be consumed by the overwhelming fear and uncertainty that had clouded her heart for so long. Darius didn't let her pull away. Instead, he gathered her into his arms, his warmth surrounding her as he held her close. His scent filled her senses, earthy, like the forest after a rainstorm, like home. She closed her eyes, resting her forehead against his chest, allowing herself to feel safe for just a moment. The world outside their little bubble of warmth and security didn't matter. Not for now, but soon she knew it would. As they stood there, in the quiet calm of the early morning, Adara felt the faintest stir of movement in the air, a breeze, a whisper, something that tugged at her senses. She pulled away from Darius, her heart pounding suddenly, her breath catching in her throat. She wasn't sure what it was, but the hair on the back of her neck stood on end. Her instincts were on edge. Darius, she whispered urgently, her eyes scanning the trees. Something's wrong. I can feel it. Darius stiffened, his gaze flicking to the woods, every muscle in his body tensing. His posture became rigid, his eyes narrowing, scanning the shadows. The quiet of the morning seemed to stretch out, pulling tight like a bowstring before it snapped. Without warning, a rustling sound erupted from the forest, too close. A low growl rumbled in the distance, sending a chill down Adara's spine. She didn't need to ask who it was. Malachi, Darius muttered, his voice filled with a deadly calm. He's not done with us yet. Adara felt her heart stop in her chest, the weight of the words pressing down on her like a vice. They were coming for them, and this time she wasn't sure if they would make it out alive. The storm was upon them. Chapter 7. The Coming Storm. The air was thick with tension, and Adara could feel it pressing in on her chest, each breath harder than the last. The distant growl echoed in her ears, the sound of something far too close. For comfort. She felt the weight of Darius's presence beside her, solid and unyielding, but even he seemed to be on edge. The calm they had shared moments ago shattered in an instant, replaced by the raw, biting reality that their lives, her life, was in danger. "Stay close to me," Darius murmured, his voice low, almost a command. His eyes burned with a fiery determination that sent a shiver down her spine. Adara didn't need to be told twice. She moved closer to him instinctively, her body pressing against his side, her heart pounding in sync with his. The pack, their pack, was vulnerable right now. And Malachi, the rogue lichen with eyes full of malice and ambition, had made it clear that he wouldn't stop until he had everything. Darius's hand found hers, his grip firm and possessive, as though trying to anchor her to him. His golden eyes scanned the forest, the muscle in his jaw ticking with restrained fury. He could feel the pull of the bond between them just as strongly as she did, but his focus was unwavering. He had a role to play now. He had to protect her. They had to survive. "Malachi will strike soon," Darius said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "We need to be ready." Adara nodded, her eyes wide, but her thoughts were scattered, torn between the fear of what was to come and the inexplicable urge to reach out and let herself fall into Darius's arms. She wanted to believe, wanted to trust in him, in them. But the shadows of doubt still clouded her mind. Could they really fight Malachi? Could she fight at his side when all she felt was this suffocating fear? A rustling sound broke her from her thoughts, a sound far too near for comfort. Darius stiffened, his grip tightening on her hand. "They're here," he whispered, the words laced with a dark foreboding. "Stay behind me." Adara wanted to protest, to fight alongside him, but she knew that this was his battle to lead. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to hide, but she stayed, her heart thudding in her chest as she watched Darius step forward, his posture tall and commanding, every inch the alpha he was born to be. A figure emerged from the trees, tall and imposing, his movements deliberate. His eyes gleamed in the dim light, pale and cold, like ice against fire. Malachi, the rogue alpha that had once been a part of their pack, the one who had been cast out for his treachery, now returned to claim what he believed was rightfully his. "Darius," Malachi's voice rang out, smooth as velvet, but laced with a dangerous edge. "I must admit, I never expected you to stand in my way so fiercely, but I suppose we all have our flaws." "You've already taken enough, Malachi," Darius said, his voice unwavering, but there was a warning there, a promise of violence if Malachi crossed the line. "This ends tonight." Malachi's lips curled into a smile, one that sent a cold shiver down Adara's spine. "Oh, Darius," he said, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "It was never meant to be this way. But you've made your choices, just as I've made mine. You were always the good little alpha, always playing by the rules. But the world doesn't work that way. You know this as well as I do." Adara's pulse quickened as the tension in the air thickened. The weight of Malachi's words hung between them, but she could see it now, see the cracks in his facade, the desperation beneath the calculated calm. He wasn't just after power, he was after everything. "You think you can take her from me?" Darius's voice was filled with quiet fury now. "You're wrong. I'll die before I let you have her." Malachi's gaze flicked briefly to Adara, his eyes narrowing with malicious intent. "She's already mine," he said with a dark laugh. "You just don't realize it yet." The words hit her like a blow to the chest, and she flinched, stepping back instinctively. She didn't know why, but something in her stirred at his claim, a feeling of ownership that made her skin crawl. Darius had warned her of this, the lengths to which Malachi would go, but hearing him say it out loud made the threat feel all too real. "No, Malachi," Darius said, his voice low and full of warning. "She is mine, and I will not let you have her." In an instant, the air seemed to crackle with power. The tension that had been building exploded, the air vibrating with the force of their energy. Malachi's eyes blazed, his body shifting as the rogue lichen within him awakened. His wolf was wild, untamed, and it matched the ferocity in his gaze. Adara felt the power in the air, the way it crackled around them, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. And then, with a growl that shook the very ground beneath her feet, Malachi lunged. Darius was faster, his movements a blur of speed and precision. In a flash he shifted into his wolf form, his massive dark fur rippling like liquid shadow. Adara barely had time to blink before the two lichens collided, the sound of teeth snapping and claws raking against fur filling the air. The battle between the two alphas was a storm of fury and power, the forest around them trembling under the weight of their fight. Darius moved with a fluid grace, his wolf form a perfect extension of his will, but Malachi was no slouch. He fought with every ounce of his strength, using every dirty trick in his arsenal. Adara stood frozen, her heart racing, her mind torn between the primal instinct to run and the overwhelming need to stay and fight by Darius's side. Her body screamed at her to shift, to join the fight, but she felt paralyzed, unable to move, unable to do anything but watch. Adara. Darius's voice rang out, a sharp command even midst the chaos. Get to the cave now. It was as if the command broke the spell that held her in place. Without thinking, without questioning, she turned and ran. She could hear the sounds of the battle behind her, the growls and snarls of their wolves echoing in the night. The ground beneath her feet seemed to shift with each step, and her heart pounded in her chest as she ran, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The cave was only a few yards away, hidden within the heart of the forest, a place of safety they had used in the past. She couldn't help but think of the days they had spent there, days of peace, days before Malachi's return. But those days were over. She reached the mouth of the cave, but as she stepped inside, the cold air seemed to close in around her, the darkness pressing against her like a tangible force. And that's when she heard it, the snap of twigs, the rustle of leaves. Malachi's voice followed her, a haunting whisper on the wind. "You can run, Adara," he called, his voice a low rumble that sent chills down her spine. "But you'll never be free. You'll always be mine." Chapter 8. The Heart's Choice. Adara's breath came in sharp, uneven gasps as she pushed deeper into the cave, her body trembling with both fear and adrenaline. The darkness inside felt suffocating, as though the shadows themselves were closing in around her. She had run, instinctively, desperately, without thought, without reason. And now all she could do was wait, her heart racing as she strained to hear the sounds of the battle still echoing through the trees outside. The growls, the snarls, the brutal clash of teeth and claws. It was all too much. Darius, her alpha, was out there, fighting for her, for them. But Malachi was ruthless, wild and determined. The rogue lichen had always been a threat, but now, as she stood in the cave, alone and vulnerable, it felt all too real, too close. Malachi's voice. "You'll always be mine." The words reverberated in her mind, repeating over and over like a haunting melody. She shook her head, trying to push them away, but they clung to her, wrapping around her thoughts like a cold, unrelenting vice. "No," she thought fiercely, "I'm not his. I belong to no one but myself." But as the sounds of the fight grew louder outside, the reality of her situation sank in. The bond between her and Darius was undeniable, but Malachi's claim was equally as forceful. What did it mean to be bound by fate? What did it mean to have a destiny dictated by forces beyond your control? And why did it feel like her heart was being torn in two? She stumbled further into the cave, her hands reaching for the rocky walls as she tried to ground herself, to steady her breath. She needed to think. She needed to do something, anything, to stop the flood of fear and doubt from drowning her. A rustle of movement behind her snapped her out of her thoughts, and her body went rigid. She whipped around, her heart leaping in her throat, her eyes searching the darkness of the cave. "Darius," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but filled with a desperation that she couldn't hide. No answer came. Then the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoed toward her. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end, and her breath caught in her throat. She had been so focused on the outside world, on the fight, that she hadn't even heard him approach. But now, standing there, she could feel him. She could feel his presence. Her pulse quickened, and her instinct screamed at her to move, to run. She didn't know whether it was friend or foe who was approaching, but her legs remained rooted to the ground, unable to make a sound, unable to breathe. The figure finally emerged from the shadows, and the moment she saw him, a wave of both relief and dread washed over her. It was Darius. His clothes were torn, his body covered in scratches and blood, but his eyes, those golden eyes, still burned with that same intensity, the same unwavering strength that had drawn her to him from the very beginning. He was alive. And yet, the moment she saw him, something in her chest tightened. He was different. There was a darkness in him now, a coldness that hadn't been there before. He wasn't just the man she had come to love, the Alpha who had been her protector. This was the Lichen King, the warrior, the one who would stop at nothing to keep her safe. But at what cost? Adara. Darius's voice was ragged, his breathing heavy as he stepped toward her. His gaze flickered over her, searching for any sign of injury, any sign that she had been harmed. When his eyes finally met hers, they softened, but there was still something there, a hard edge that made her step back instinctively. "What happened out there?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, though the fear in it was unmistakable. "Where is Malachi?" Darius's gaze darkened, and his lips pressed into a thin line. "Gone," he said simply, his voice hoarse. "I took care of him." Adara felt her stomach twist, a cold chill spreading through her. "What do you mean, took care of him?" she asked, stepping closer to him now, her hands trembling as she reached out, touching his arm gently. "Darius, you didn't—" His eyes flashed, a flicker of something dangerous crossing his face, but it was gone just as quickly as it appeared. He reached out and cupped her face, his thumb brushing across her cheek in a tender gesture that contrasted sharply with the intensity of his gaze. "Malachi won't be a problem anymore," he said, his voice low and steady, as though trying to reassure her. But his words felt like a lie, like a shield he was putting up to protect her from the reality that was so painfully close. "Darius." Adara's voice broke, her throat tightening as she felt the full weight of what had happened. "What did you do?" He closed his eyes for a moment, his expression shifting. "I had no choice, Adara. He would have killed us both if I hadn't done what I did. I had to end it." Adara stepped back, her heart pounding painfully in her chest, the coldness in his voice, the way his eyes hardened. She had never seen him like this before. She had always known he was capable of great violence, but to see it in him now, so raw and unfiltered, unsettled her in ways she hadn't prepared for. "Darius," she whispered again, the fear in her voice giving way to something else, something deep, something that resonated in the very core of her being. "What did it cost you?" He opened his eyes then, meeting her gaze with a somber expression. The weight of his answer seemed to press on him, and Adara could feel the sorrow in his eyes, the silent pain he wasn't willing to voice. "It cost me you," he said quietly, his voice barely a whisper. The words hit her like a blow to the chest, stealing the air from her lungs. She took a shaky step back, her head spinning. "What do you mean?" she asked, but she already knew. He reached out for her again, but this time she couldn't bring herself to take his hand. The distance between them seemed insurmountable, the gap widening with each word, each breath. "I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe, Adara, but I need you to understand this is who I am. I will protect you, no matter what the cost. Adara's heart ached with the weight of his words. She could see it now, the darkness that had always been there, buried beneath the surface, now spilling out. Darius had made his choice, just as Malachi had made his. And now, it seemed, she was the one caught between them. She wanted to be strong, wanted to believe in the love that had once felt so real, so pure. But now, all she could feel was the cold, sharp edge of a decision that had already been made for her. And in that moment, Adara realized the truth. She was never going to be able to escape this. Chapter 9. The Choice of the Heart. The days that followed were heavy with silence. Adara could feel the weight of it pressing down on her, each step she took feeling like it led her further into a world she wasn't sure she could navigate. The bond with Darius, once a source of comfort and hope, now felt like a shackle, pulling her between the love she felt for him and the fear of what he had become. The aftermath of the battle with Malachi had left their pack in disarray. While Darius had dealt with the rogue Alpha, his actions had left a permanent mark. Adara couldn't deny the coldness she saw in his eyes now, the unspoken burden he carried. She had always known he was capable of darkness, but to witness it firsthand, to see the man she loved make a choice that irrevocably altered everything, they both knew that the consequences would be far-reaching. Darius didn't push her, he didn't force her to confront her feelings, but the tension between them lingered, an invisible barrier that neither of them could break. Every time she looked at him, she saw the weight of what had transpired, the price he had paid for the peace he had given them. But what about her? Adara had been trying to find herself again, to reclaim the parts of her that had been swallowed by the bond. She had always been strong, always fought for what she believed in. But now, she was uncertain. She no longer knew what she could trust, her heart, her instincts, or the man who had promised to protect her at all costs. That evening, as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, casting long shadows over the camp, Adara found herself walking alone along the edge of the forest. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the scent of the earth, the pine, and something else, something that made her heart beat faster. A figure emerged from the shadows ahead of her, and she froze, her heart leaping into her throat. "Darius," she said, her voice a mixture of relief and anxiety. He stood there, his figure tall and imposing, his eyes locked on hers. But there was something different about him tonight. The storm that had been brewing in his gaze, the hard edge to his demeanor, had softened. His shoulders were relaxed, his posture open, vulnerable in a way that made Adara's heart ache. "You've been avoiding me," Darius said quietly, his voice low but not accusatory. There was a softness to it, a pleading that broke through the tension between them. Adara didn't know how to respond. She had been avoiding him, had been keeping herself distant, because the closer she got, the more she feared the truth of what was between them. "I'm not avoiding you," she said softly, her eyes meeting his. "I just need space. I need to think." He nodded, his lips pressing into a thin line, but there was no anger in his eyes, just understanding. "I know, and I'm sorry. I should have given you more time, but we're running out of it, Adara." The words hit her like a bolt of lightning, jolting her into the present. Running out of time. The danger wasn't over. Malachi was gone, but the fallout from his actions would echo for far longer than they could anticipate. The pack was divided, the threat of betrayal still loomed, and with it came the crushing weight of responsibility that Darius carried on his shoulders. Adara could see it in his eyes, the toll it had taken on him. The weight of the throne, of their future, had begun to wear on him, just as it had begun to wear on her. "I can't pretend this is easy," she said, her voice trembling. "I can't pretend I know what comes next, what we're supposed to do. But I know one thing." She took a step closer to him, her heart pounding, her emotions swirling in a tangled mess. "I can't keep running. Not from you, not from this." Darius's expression softened, and for the first time in what felt like ages, he looked vulnerable. The man who had once seemed invincible now seemed human, frail. "I've never asked you to run from me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've only asked you to trust me." Adara's breath caught in her throat. "I do trust you," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "But I don't know if I can trust myself." Darius reached out, his hand brushing gently against her cheek, a gesture that was both tender and urgent. "Then let me help you. Let me show you that you don't have to carry this alone anymore. Not the fear, not the weight of our bond, not this future we're building. We're in this together, Adara." Tears welled in her eyes, and she stepped closer to him, her heart beating faster with each breath. She had been so afraid of what their love meant, of the cost of their bond. But now, standing in front of him, she felt the warmth of his touch, the safety of his presence. And for the first time in a long time, she felt something else. Hope. "I'm scared," she confessed, her voice small but filled with the weight of everything she had been holding inside. "I'm scared of what this could mean, of what we could lose." Darius's gaze softened, his eyes searching hers with a depth that made her heart ache. "We've already lost so much, Adara, but we've survived, and we'll keep surviving, together." And in that moment, something inside Adara shifted. The fear, the uncertainty, they didn't vanish, but the love, the unwavering trust she felt for Darius, overshadowed it all. She didn't need to know what the future held. She didn't need to have every answer. All she needed was this moment, this connection, and the promise that they would face everything together. She reached out, taking his hand in hers, feeling the steady beat of his pulse beneath her fingertips. "I'm ready," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm ready to stand with you. No more running." Darius's lips curved into a rare, soft smile, and for the first time in what felt like forever, they both knew that the storm was finally over. The past had shaped them, but it didn't control them. They had a future to build, and they would build it together. Epilogue, bound by love, forged by fate. The days that followed were quiet in a way that was almost eerie. The storms that had raged within their hearts, within their pack, had calmed, at least for now. Darius and Adara stood side by side, no longer just alpha and mate, but two souls intertwined by fate, bound by the blood they shared and the love they had chosen to fight for. The pack, though shaken by the chaos that had come with Malachi's return, was finding its footing once more. Darius had reasserted his control, his leadership undisputed. But there was something softer in him now, something gentler when he turned his gaze to Adara, something that hadn't been there before the battle with Malachi. Adara could feel it too. Her own heart had begun to heal, the cracks left by her fear and her doubts slowly mending. The weight of the bond, of the decision she had made, no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a promise, a commitment to stand beside the man she loved, no matter what the future held. They were walking through the woods now, a rare moment of peace amidst the chaotic world they inhabited. The sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled light across the ground. The air smelled of pine and earth, fresh and alive, as though the forest itself was welcoming them back into its embrace. Adara could feel Darius beside her, his presence like a steady, reassuring rhythm in her life. She looked up at him, taking in the way his dark hair fell across his forehead, the strength in his features that still made her heart flutter despite everything they had been through. "I never thought it would be like this," she said quietly, her voice filled with wonder as she gazed up at him. "I never thought I could feel this at peace. Not after everything." Darius glanced down at her, his lips curving into a soft smile. "I know," he replied, his voice low and full of warmth. "But sometimes peace comes after the storm. We've weathered it, Adara. We've made it through together." She nodded, a sense of clarity washing over her. Together. That was all that mattered now. The future, the challenges that still awaited them, she would face them with him. And no matter how difficult it got, she knew they would be strong enough to handle it. She reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his, feeling the familiar warmth and strength in his grip. They walked in silence for a while, the weight of their shared moments hanging between them, unspoken but deeply understood. Finally, they stopped at a small clearing in the woods where the grass was soft beneath their feet and the sunlight streamed through the trees like golden threads. Darius turned to face her, his expression serious but tender. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly, his voice thick with emotion, "for everything, for the choices I made, for the things I said. I never wanted to hurt you, Adara." Adara's heart swelled with emotion, and she reached up to touch his cheek, her thumb brushing gently over the scar that had marked him. "You don't have to apologize. We've both made mistakes. But we're here now. And that's all that matters." Darius's eyes softened, the golden fire in them dimming as he looked down at her. "You're right," he said, his voice full of quiet reverence. "And I'll spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of you." Adara felt her chest tighten, the love she felt for him overwhelming in its depth. "You already have, Darius," she whispered. "You already have." He stepped closer then, his hands cupping her face as he leaned down to kiss her, softly, tenderly, as though the kiss itself were a vow, a promise of everything they would face together. The world seemed to melt away in that moment, and for the first time in a long time, Adara felt truly whole. As they pulled apart, Darius looked at her with that same intensity that had always captivated her. But now there was something more, something rooted in the certainty that they had found their place in each other's lives. "We've built something here, Adara," he said, his voice steady yet full of a quiet hope. "And I won't let anything tear it down." She smiled, the warmth spreading through her chest. "Neither will I." And so they stood there, together, surrounded by the forest that had witnessed their journey. The future was still uncertain, still filled with challenges, but for the first time, Adara felt a quiet confidence settle in her heart. The darkness of their past would always linger, but they had created something stronger, a love forged through fire, bound by fate and tempered by choice. They had found their way back to each other, and no matter what lay ahead, they would face it together. The end of one battle, the beginning of another. But this time, it was their battle to fight, their future to shape, and for the first time, Adara knew she was ready,